Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, as always, Gary Parker, and this is episode 443 for August 25th, 2025. Last week's interview was just really amazing. If you missed it, you should definitely go back and listen. It was about how privacy legislation is made and honestly unmade or blocked by special interests, lobbyists. And it's really, really eye-opening. I've actually sent that podcast to my local state representatives. And, that's something you might want to consider doing too. I'm going to guess that a lot of our state level representatives who probably do their job part-time are probably not aware of a lot of the ways in which lobbyists do their thing. Now, I'm sure if they've been around long enough, they've seen some of that, but it's still a really great episode. And it would give you a chance to tell your representatives, hey, I want privacy legislation in my state. And here is somebody who is already doing it that you might want to talk to and learn from. It would also be a great one to share on social media, and maybe you could find the social media handles or accounts of your representatives. You could tag them there. I contacted my representatives, and I haven't really heard back yet. Not even an automated response, which is kind of weird. Maybe I somehow flubbed my email address. But anyway, I did it, and I just thought you might want to consider doing it too. All right, so we've got a new show for you this week. Plenty of things to talk about, most of them bad. But we got a couple good things here at the end. First of all, if you've got a Dell laptop, just pretty much any Dell laptop, you're going to want to pay attention to this. There was a critical security vulnerability found, and I'll tell you how to fix that. Meta might be secretly scanning your phone's camera roll. I'll tell you about that and how you can turn it off. The National Public Data site is back. This was a data broker that was horribly hacked, I think last year. But they're actually back and in business and doing something slightly different, but it's still not good. I'll let you know how you can remove your info from there if you find it. Also, in some states that actually have privacy laws, part of those laws often require data brokers to register and to be responsive to the citizens of that state. But a recent study is showing that they're basically ignoring these privacy laws. Hyundai wants their Ioniq 5 owners to pay to fix a keyless entry security bug. And related to that, there's been a lot of stories lately about the Flipper Zero, which is a wireless penetration testing device used by security researchers, which of course could also be abused. But there's been a lot of stories about how they've been used to steal vehicles, and there was a really great response from Flipper on that I want to read. The Supreme Court has allowed Mississippi's social media law to go into effect. This is the one requiring age verification, which is really even more intrusive than the Texas one dealing with pornography. Another study has shown that data brokers are hiding their opt-out pages from search engines, making them much more difficult to find. And we talked about the T app, that's TEA, as in spill the, that was an app for women used to basically create report cards on men that they've dated. Well, not to be outdone, another developer has whipped up an app for men that does the same thing for rating women called TeaOnHer. And sadly, just like the T app, the TeaOnHer app had horrible security. And some researchers from TechCrunch were able to get into their system and get access to all their users' data in less than 10 minutes. And then some good news. The UK apparently has backed down on its requirement for Apple to provide a backdoor to their encryption. That story is still developing, but it sounds like really good news, and I'll tell you what's going on there. And finally, there's a group in the EU that is providing the citizens of the EU a way to provide feedback on the chat control law, which is set to go into effect, I believe, in October. And then finally, we'll get to my tip of the week, which is going to be the first in a series of articles on my website and tips of the week here on the show about what I'm calling a data diet, which will be about finding your old online accounts, ones that you've forgotten about or haven't accessed in a very long time, finding out what data of yours is there, deleting that data, and maybe even closing those accounts. And arguably the hardest part of all that is trying to come up with an exhaustive list of your accounts. So I'm going to help you do all of that, and I'll give you an intro to where that's going in this week's tip of the week. So lots to talk about. Let's get to it. All right, first up, this is from PC World, and it's about a critical vulnerability in many, many Dell laptops. Time and again, dangerous security vulnerabilities are discovered in the hardware of certain manufacturers. Certain Dell laptop models, we're talking over 100 different models and millions of affected devices, are affected by a chip security vulnerability that can lead to serious problems. Dell has issued a warning about it, categorizing it as critical and stating that it's a flaw in the Broadcom BCM5820X series chips, which are mainly installed in Dell's Precision, Latitude, and Pro laptops. A list of all affected devices can be found in Dell's support article, and that's a link, which of course you can get to via the show notes. We're looking at a total of 5 individual vulnerabilities. That's a problem with the Control Vault 3 function, which is used to store passwords and biometric data, among other things, which is why the problem is particularly dangerous. In the worst-case scenario, attackers could exploit the flaws to steal data and remote execute malicious code. Due to the nature of the vulnerability, it's also likely that stored passwords are no longer secure. The vulnerability was first disclosed on June 13th, but further details have apparently only now been communicated. Dell strongly recommends that users update their devices with the latest Dell security updates to protect against attacks and ensure the safe use of affected devices. Affected users can find the relevant download links in Dell's support document. Again, a link in this article which you can find in the show notes. Alternatively, you can search for updates in the Dell Command Center and should at least install the critical patches being offered. So again, see this article for more details and links to all these important things. It's not clear whether Windows Update will include these fixes, but I wouldn't wait. I'd just go ahead and get them now. This sounds pretty severe. Next up, this one's from ZDNet, and it's another eye-rolling revelation about things that Meta's up to behind the scenes that is just maddening. So it talks about Meta, which of course is the parent company of Facebook. Meta could be analyzing and retaining your phone's photos without your explicit consent. Some Facebook users have noticed that within their app settings, Meta automatically switched on 2 toggles that allow it to access their device's camera roll to offer AI-powered suggestions, including, quote, personalized creative ideas like travel highlights and collages, unquote. The problem? These camera roll sharing suggestions features appear to be turned on by default, even for users who say they never saw a quote-unquote cloud processing pop-up from Facebook that asks for permission to enable them. If you did see the pop-up and tapped Allow on it, you agreed to Meta's AI terms of service and permitted your media and facial features to be analyzed by AI. Facebook then uses your camera roll images, including the dates on them and the presence of people or objects, to suggest collages, themed albums, recap posts, or AI-styled versions of your pictures. The suggestions are only visible to you unless you choose to share them, and Meta says the media won't be used for ad targeting. But you're still giving Meta the right to access and retain your camera roll images, and that raises serious privacy concerns, especially for users who never knowingly opted in. If you want to check whether the features are turned on for you and possibly turn them off, here's how. Okay, now I'm going to walk through these steps, which you probably won't remember, but maybe you can come back to it. Or you can, of course, just find the article in the show notes later. But basically, go to your smartphone, open the Facebook app. You'll need to be signed in. Tap the menu icon in the bottom right corner. Look for Settings and Privacy, and this should take you to Settings. Scroll down and look for Camera Roll Sharing Suggestions. And this will open a preference page with a couple of toggles. Once you're inside the Camera Roll Sharing Suggestions page, notice the 2 separate switches. If they're blue and the toggle circle is pushed to the right, they are on, meaning Meta is already processing and retaining your phone's photos. Turn them off so the app can't automatically upload and analyze your camera roll. So then it goes on to talk about these, the 2 different ones. One is get camera roll suggestions when you're browsing Facebook. If you turn this off, it will stop Facebook from using your basic camera roll data, such as which videos you favorited and when photos were taken, to suggest sharing media you haven't yet uploaded. The other one is called Get Creative Ideas Made For You by allowing camera roll cloud processing. If this is on, it will allow Facebook to continually upload media from your camera roll and using details like time, location, themes, and the presence of people or objects to generate personalized creative ideas such as recaps and AI restylings. And then there's a little FAQ at the bottom of this that has some interesting points. It says, why is Facebook Cloud processing my device's camera roll? Meta is uploading and analyzing your camera roll photos and videos, even ones you haven't posted, in its cloud in order to generate AI-powered suggestions like collages, monthly recaps, and whatever. We talked about that. Where is this feature being tested? Meta has confirmed the feature is a test, saying, quote, we're exploring ways to make content sharing easier for people on Facebook by testing suggestions of ready to share and curated content from a person's camera roll, unquote. The test is currently available in the US and Canada, but it's not available in Illinois or Texas due to those states' privacy laws. Did Facebook ask for my consent before turning this on? Meta is showing a pop-up asking users if they want to enable cloud processing, but some users claim they haven't seen it. Instead, they found the toggles in their settings already switched on by default, raising questions about whether clear consent was given. Can I remove my photos once they've been uploaded? ZDNet's sister site, CNET, reports that Meta pulls your newer pictures, roughly the last 30 days, and if you disable the feature, your uploaded photos will be deleted after 30 days. The only way to confirm is by downloading your Facebook account data, and that's a link, and that's something you can do, which is kind of painful and ugly, because it would get all your Facebook data, but if you really want to know if they have it, supposedly downloading your data from them would tell you that. And then finally, why is this a potential privacy issue? It expands Meta's reach beyond the content you've chosen to upload and share online into your private, unposted photos and videos. For many, that's a major red flag and a line they're not comfortable crossing, understandably so. Okay, so I know some of you are probably thinking, hey, doesn't Apple do this too? And it does, but I'm pretty sure that Apple's processing is all on device. It is not sending all your photos up to the cloud in order to do this processing, and therefore not exposing all of that data to potential abuse, either by the company as a policy, if it changes its mind later on what it wants to do with that information, or training its AI data engines, or accessed by a rogue employee who might be able to go through your photos, or being subject to being exfiltrated by cybercriminals. It's much better to do all of this stuff on the device. So if you are on Facebook still and you have these apps installed on your phone, I would absolutely go and check these settings and I would turn them off. All right, next up, this was from Lifehacker, and it's about national public data, which we reported on probably last year when they had a massive hack of user data. Well, it looks like somehow they are back in business and your data may be there again in a different way. And if you find it, though, there is a way for you to ask for it to be removed, and I would suggest you try to find it and do so. So here's the article. In the endless saga of hacks and data breaches, it's practically guaranteed that at least some of your personal information is available on the internet. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take steps to remove or protect it wherever you can, including from databases that have a history of being compromised. National Public Data, a background check company operated by Jericho Pictures Incorporated, was the target of a massive hack in early 2024, which led to the leak of billions of records containing data culled from non-public sources like Social Security numbers. The site has since returned under new ownership as a free people search engine, and while it purports to rely on publicly available information, you can, and should, remove your records. If nothing else, doing so means one less place that people can easily find your address, phone number, and other personal information. Last year, National Public Data was hacked by a group known as USDOD, which subsequently released a purported 2.7 billion stolen records containing sensitive information from individuals in the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. Jericho Pictures Incorporated was the subject of multiple class action lawsuits and later filed for bankruptcy, after which it shut down National Public Data. As PC Mag reports, the site has recently resurfaced and is still branded as National Public Data, though it is now registered to a Florida-based company called Perfect Privacy LLC, which provides anonymous domain registration. National Public Data now allows you to search information from databases covering everything from bankruptcy to criminal records to voter registration. According to the About Us page, this includes, quote, federal, state, and local government agencies, social media pages, property ownership databases, and other reliable platforms, unquote. You can enter a name, city, and state to pull up records for an individual if they are covered by what National Public Data has access to. Even if the information compiled by National Public Data is public somewhere, you should still opt out of having your records included in the site's search. The rebooted site does allow you to remove your information through an opt-out form, and that's a link that you can click on. All you need to do is search for your profile on the site's main page, copy the URL, paste it into the opt-out form, and click the Request Removal button. You'll then need to provide your email and confirm your request. This is just so maddening. There are so many of these sites out there, and it's whack-a-mole. It's so hard to keep up with them. That's why I personally have signed up for easy opt-outs. It's $20 a year. They're pretty darn good. I would certainly give that a look. For $20, it's just kind of a no-brainer. They don't cover everything, but they cover a lot. But still, regardless, I would go ahead to this particular site. Again, there's links in this article that allow you to search for yourself or others, by the way. You may as well search for people that you care about, your loved ones, to see if they're also in there. And then if you find them, you might suggest to them that they opt out as well. I don't think it actually asks for any sort of verification, so you could probably do the opt out for them if you're sure that's what they'd want. But you probably still should let them know that their information is there and maybe let them do it or help them do it. I didn't find any of my information there, luckily, but I did find at least one of my family members was in there, so I will be opting them out shortly. All right, this next one's from the EFF, and it's just really maddening. Really makes you angry. But it's a good thing they're reporting on it, and I wanted to pass along to you what's going on here. And this will rhyme a lot with what we heard from Monique Priestley last week about why it's so hard to not only pass privacy legislation, but to enforce it. Of the many principles EFF fights for in consumer data privacy legislation, one of the most basic is a right to access the data companies have about you. It's only fair. So many companies collect information about us without our knowledge or consent. We at least should have a way to find out what they purport to know about our lives. Yet a recent paper from researchers at the University of California, Irvine, found that of 543 data brokers in California's data broker registry at the time of publishing, 43% failed to even respond to requests to access data. Let's stop there for a second. That's more than 4 in 10 companies from an industry that makes its money from collecting and selling our personal information, ignoring one of our most basic rights under the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, the right to know what information companies have about us. Such failures violate the law. If this happens to you, you should file a complaint with the California Privacy Protection Agency and the California Attorney General's office. This is particularly galling because it's not easy to file a request in the first place. As these researchers point out, there is no streamlined process for these time-consuming requests. People often won't have the time or energy to see them through. Yet when someone does make the effort to file a request, some companies still feel just fine ignoring the law and their customers completely. 4 in 10 data brokers are leaving requesters on read in violation of the law and our privacy rights. That's not a passing grade in anyone's book. Without consequences to back up our rights, as this research illustrates, many companies will bank on not getting caught or factor weak slaps on the wrist into the cost of doing business. This is why EFF fights for bills that have teeth. For example, we demand that people have the right to sue for privacy violations themselves, what's known as a private right of action. Companies hate this form of enforcement because it can cost them real money when they flout the law. When the CCPA started out as a ballot initiative, it had a private right of action, including to enforce access requests. But when the legislature enacted the CCPA in exchange for the initiative's proponents removing it from the ballot, corporate interests killed the private right of action in negotiations. We encourage the California Privacy Protection Agency and the California Attorney General's office, which both have the authority to bring these companies to task under the CCPA, to look into these findings. Moving forward, we all have to continue to fight for better laws, to strengthen existing laws, and call on states to enforce the laws on their books to respect everyone's privacy. Data brokers must face real consequences for brazenly flouting our privacy rights. So again, we talked about the private right of action with Monique Priestley in last week's magnificent interview on the struggles of passing meaningful privacy laws. Again, if you missed it, definitely go back and check that out. Attorney General's offices only take up cases like this when there's a widespread abuse and harm. So let's hope that the California AG's office holds these data brokers accountable. Or else, what's the point of having privacy laws at all? All right, next up, this is from The Verge, and it's another maddening story, to be honest. And if you own a Hyundai Ioniq 5, you definitely don't want to listen to this one. Hyundai is now offering an optional security upgrade for the Ioniq 5 in the UK that prevents the car from being stolen with a Game Boy-like device. Now, let me stop for a second here just to point out that is not a Flipper Zero. We will talk about that in a minute, but it's another kind of a homemade electronic device. Hyundai wants some Ioniq 5 owners to pay £49, or about $65, to upgrade hardware and software components to prevent these thieves using handheld devices to unlock and start cars without needing a key. Kia, Hyundai, and Genesis EVs have been under attack in the UK and elsewhere in recent years, thanks to a sophisticated Game Boy-like handheld device that cracks the wireless protocols used by Hyundai Motor Company Group on vehicles like the Ioniq 5, the original Kia EV6, and the Genesis GV60. Hyundai is now offering a paid upgrade for Ioniq 5 owners in the UK, which it promises will address evolving security threats with improved software and hardware components for a customer contribution of £49. You can check to see if your Ioniq 5 needs this upgrade here, but there hasn't been a similar bulletin for the US vehicles yet. It's not clear why Hyundai is asking customers to pay for the luxury of having their cars protected against a flaw in Hyundai's own security mechanisms, particularly as the car maker offers a 5-year warranty on its vehicles. We've reached out to Hyundai to comment on this security upgrade. Hyundai's upgrades are designed to protect against a rise in thieves using a handheld device, which was reportedly designed by hackers in Europe to resemble a Game Boy. It's been used for at least 5 years and works on a variety of cars that use keyless entry systems. The Drive reported in 2020 that the device can intercept the signal emitted when you touch a car's door handle, allowing it to crack the algorithm and send back a signal so the car thinks a legitimate key is present and unlocks the doors. The same manipulation technique then works to start the car and steal it, and it's as easy as hitting a button instead of performing a relay attack to amplify the signal of a legitimate key, which, by the way, we'll talk about here in just a minute. While these Game Boy-like devices cost around €20,000 in Europe, they've been widely used to steal a variety of Kia, Hyundai, Nissan, Genesis, and Mitsubishi cars in recent years. Hyundai's Ioniq and Kia's EV6 models were even among the most stolen cars in the UK in 2024, demonstrating just how vulnerable these cars are to this type of attack. Now, there was another Kia and Hyundai attack as well. There was actually a different one than this one that they're talking about, so they've had lots of problems. But this is absolutely inexcusable. Honestly, I can't imagine how this is not going to result in many lawsuits. These cars are under warranty. These cars have a security problem that allows the vehicle to be stolen. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if who ends up suing them are the insurance companies. There's just no liability today for security failures. And I don't understand how that could be. Maybe we need cases like this that are actually going to update the established case law to include these sorts of defects in products as things that companies would be liable for. But this leads to another story that's been making the rounds recently, and you might have been tempted to think that this Game Boy-like device was what we call a Flipper Zero, which is a really interesting product. But let me get to this next story and I'll explain. So I've seen a bunch of stories lately about stealing cars with this device called a Flipper Zero. I own one of these things. I actually was part of the original Kickstarter of these and have a really cool black model that you can't buy online. And it's really amazing. And it's this tiny little device, thicker than a cell phone, but smaller than a cell phone, with a really cute little display on it with a little D-pad. And it's got a bunch of built-in radios and some really cool software that lets you use those radios to do some fun things. Like, for example, you could use it to read RFIDs. Like if you've had your pet chipped and you know where the chip is on your pet, or you could probably use this to find it, you could actually use your Flipper Zero to read the ID off of that chip. You can also use a Flipper Zero to read the information off of a hotel key card. And in some cases, you can actually clone it and use it to open your door. So you might already be thinking, well, that doesn't sound good. And yes, that's true, which means that, some of these key cards need to up their security game. But all this device is it's a bunch of radios packed in a really small little package that allows you to run some software to sniff these radio signals and in some cases decode them and even play them back. And there have been a raft of stories in the news lately about these little devices being used to steal cars. And it turns out that that's really not what's going on here. So while I could read some of the other articles that talk about this, I just want to skip to this response from Flipper because it has some really interesting information in it. And it explains the kind of techniques that can be used to steal a vehicle and how the Flipper can't really do those things. So let me read this response from Flipper, which will kind of also explain what's going on here. You may have seen news reports about the secret Flipper Zero firmware that allegedly hacks any car, as covered by The Verge, Gizmodo, 404 Media, and The Drive have all written about it. Let's dive in to see where this claim holds up. Major spoiler, it doesn't. What happened? Some darknet online stores have started selling so-called private firmware for Flipper Zero, claiming it can hack countless cars. They say new vulnerabilities have quote-unquote leaked online that make it possible to break dynamic protocols like keylock, and that's spelled Keeloq. In reality, all of these methods were published more than 10 years ago. Nothing new at all. The authors of such firmware are simply recycling well-known vulnerabilities and presenting them as new hacks. And importantly, these vulnerabilities have nothing to do with the real car theft, since they do not allow you to start the engine. Key lock was developed in the late 1980s and used in older access systems like garage doors and early car alarms. It's what's called a rolling code or hopping code system. The idea is that every transmission uses a new, unique signal encrypted with a 64-bit manufacturer key. This manufacturer key is the weak spot of key lock. The problem was that car makers often used the same key across an entire model line. If that key leaked, an attacker could intercept signals from any remote of that brand. The authors of these hacker firmwares are just redistributing old leaked manufacturer keys from various automakers. None of this is new. These vulnerabilities were thoroughly documented back in 2006, and there's a link in this article to that. Since then, car manufacturers have moved on to more modern radio protocols with two-way authentication, where the car and the key exchange messages to verify authenticity. Because analyzing the encrypted protocol is passive, all you need for a quote-unquote attack is to record the remote's radio signal. You don't need a flipper zero. Even a piece of wire connected to an audio jack would do. Okay, now there's two videos in this article that are both short but very interesting to watch. So if this interests you at all, you should definitely go through the show notes, find this article, and watch these two little videos. They're really pretty cool. So I just want to describe, in this first video, they show that they can rig up a very, very simple wire that acts as an antenna, plug it into your laptop's headphone jack, and using an audio recording tool like Audacity and a key fob that you bring nearby, when you push the key fob, you can actually record the signal using an audio processing program. And from that captured signal, you can get the key code. Now, remember, this is for older model cars. But it's really interesting to watch them actually do it and demonstrate how this can be done. All right, back to the article. Intercepting a remote signal is not enough to start a car. That's why these key lock attacks have nothing to do with real-world car theft. Today, real thieves target keyless entry and startup systems by attacking the key fob directly. They use a combination of relays and transmitters that proxy the signal from the real car key, tricking the car into thinking the key is nearby. We covered this technique in detail in our article, Response to Canadian Government, which, again, is a link that you might want to check out. So, the TLDR is, real car thieves don't use Flipper Zero. They have purpose-built relay tools. Here's a video showing how cars are actually stolen with these devices. Okay, again, I have to describe this to you. It's worth watching. But basically, it's a pair of guys. If they have some idea where your key fob is sitting inside your house, they go to your house in the middle of the night, if your car's sitting in the driveway. One guy goes up near the house to where they believe your key fob is, or maybe likely is. And he has a tool that can listen to and relay signals. And then the other guy goes over by the driver's side door and touches the handle, or otherwise kind of gets the car to wake up and say, oh, hey, is someone here with a key? Let me ping the key fob to see if they are really right here standing next to my car. And he also has a little sending and receiving apparatus that proxies the signal to the other guy standing near the house. And basically, they are shortening that gap. It's like a little RF wormhole that makes it appear to the car as if that key fob is actually right next to the car. And then if they can capture the signals and crack the code, they can actually send the unlock and then the start signals to the vehicle and then steal the car. So go to the show notes and find that article and find those videos if you're curious. But here's the thing. So their conclusions are the following. First, the so-called hacker firmware that the Flipper Zero is running doesn't add anything new. They just reuse techniques that have been documented since 2006. Real car thieves use completely different specialized tools. We actually talked about one in the previous article. If your car could be attacked with a Flipper Zero, it could just as easily be hacked with a piece of wire. So I thought that was really interesting. I believe what they're saying here is true, which is not to say that there might not be other techniques for getting into a car. For example, we've seen cases where if you pull out a headlight, you can actually get to what's called the CAN bus, the car area network, I think is what CAN stands for. And if you can get into that, sometimes you can hack into the car that way. I don't think any of that has to do with the Flipper Zero. But you can use a lot of these really cheap things like a Raspberry Pi or some of these other little portable devices to come up with software that will do these things. And once one person goes to the trouble of figuring out how to do it, they can make it available to everybody. And that's where things get dangerous. But it's just a tool. There's no magic about this Flipper Zero that allows it to do it. It just happens to have the capability to be programmed and have some radios in it. You could do that a bunch of other ways. So anyway, great article, short but informative, and some great videos. Check it out if you are interested. Next up, this is from NPR, and it's about the Mississippi social media law requiring age verification. The Supreme Court on Thursday refused to intervene in a lower court decision that affirmed a Mississippi law requiring users to verify their ages before using social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. The Mississippi law is far broader than a Supreme Court ruling just weeks ago that upheld a Texas law mandating age verification to access websites with sexually explicit material. Writing for the court's conservative supermajority in June, Justice Clarence Thomas held that requiring adults to verify their age prior to using sexually explicit sites did not violate the First Amendment's free speech clause because it is important to shield, quote, children from sexually explicit content, unquote. In contrast, the Mississippi law requires all users to verify their ages before using common social media sites ranging from Facebook to Nextdoor, a social media site that connects people to their nearby neighbors. In addition to the age verification rule, the Mississippi law requires social media sites to work to prevent children from accessing quote-unquote harmful materials and prohibits minors from using social media sites such as Instagram and YouTube without parental consent. NetChoice, a tech industry association committed to, quote, protecting online freedom, unquote, sued, arguing that the law unconstitutionally restricts 9 of its member websites, including those mentioned above, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Nextdoor, and YouTube. NetChoice argued that the law violates the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech without governmental interference. And NetChoice says, quote, the monitoring and censorship requirements for vague categories of speech, unquote, limits individuals' access to important information ranging from university professors' online lectures to statements from political leaders and other creative content. Though it is within parents' interest to protect their children from harmful content, said NetChoice, there are other tools, such as web browser parental controls, that parents can use to regulate their children's online use. A district court agreed with NetChoice, temporarily stopping the Mississippi law from going into effect while proceedings continued in the lower courts. But the conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals lifted the temporary block without addressing whether the law violates the First Amendment. Justice Brett Kavanaugh concurred with the court's order Thursday, but wrote, quote, in short, under this court's case law as it currently stands, the Mississippi law is likely unconstitutional. Nonetheless, because NetChoice has not sufficiently demonstrated that the balance of harms and equities favors it at this time, I concur in the court's denial of the application for interim relief, unquote. The Supreme Court refused to block the Fifth Circuit's decision allowing, at least temporarily, for the Mississippi law to go into effect. Okay, so this is an extremely troubling trend, this whole thing about requiring age verification to access content on the internet. Again, as I've said many times, I understand why they're trying to do this, but it just, regardless of whether you think it has constitutional problems, it doesn't work. And it's just going to mean that a lot of our information is going to be gathered up and it's going to be leaked when it never should have been gathered up in the first place. But these laws are spreading quickly from state to state and honestly, country to country. This is a hot thing right now. And my guess is that there will be more lawsuits that challenge these laws, but that's going to take a really long time. What may really drive change is companies leaving these jurisdictions entirely because they don't want to comply with these laws, or citizens revolting against these onerous and privacy-invasive requirements. But I hope that the event that triggers a rethinking of this requirement isn't a massive data breach of people's identification data. But maybe that's what it's going to be. Cory Doctorow did a recent article on his pluralistic blog that you might find interesting if you want to read more about this, and it talks about why age verification laws just won't work. I put a link in the show notes if you'd like to check that out. All right, next up, another maddening story. This one's from Wired, and it's about data brokers hiding their opt-out pages from search engines. Data brokers are required by California law to provide ways for consumers to request their data to be deleted, but good luck finding them. More than 30 of the companies which collect and sell consumers' personal information hid their deletion instructions from Google, according to a review by The Markup and Cal Matters, of hundreds of broker websites. This creates one more obstacle for consumers who want to delete their data. Many of the pages containing the instructions listed in an official state registry use code to tell search engines to remove the page entirely from search results. And I'll come back to how they do that after I read the article. Popular tools like Google and Bing, which is Microsoft's search engine, respect the code by excluding pages when responding to users. Data brokers nationwide must register in California under the state's Consumer Privacy Act, which allows Californians to request that their information be removed, that it not be sold, or that they get access to it. After reviewing the websites of all 499 data brokers registered with the state, we found 35 had code to stop certain pages from showing up in searches. While those companies might be fulfilling the letter of the law by providing a page consumers can use to delete their data, it means little if those consumers can't find the page, according to Matthew Schwartz, a policy analyst at Consumer Reports, who studies the California law governing data brokers and other privacy issues. And this is a quote from Schwartz, quote, "This sounds to me like a clever workaround to make it as hard as possible for consumers to find it," unquote. After the markup and Cal Matters contacted the data brokers, 8 said they would review the code on their websites or remove it entirely, and another 2 said that they had independently deleted the code before being contacted. The markup and Cal Matters confirmed 9 of the 10 companies removed the code. 2 companies said they added the code intentionally to avoid spam at the recommendation of experts and would not change it. The other 24 companies didn't respond to a request for comment. However, 3 removed the code after. The markup and Cal Matters contacted them. After publication, one company that did not previously respond, USPeopleSearch.com, said it had removed the code. Most of the companies that did respond said that they were unaware the code was on their pages. Now that's strange. But again, I'm just going to guess they contracted this out to a third party, and then somewhere along the way, that decision was made and maybe not communicated up the chain. Anyway, some companies that hid their privacy instructions from search engines included a small link at the bottom of their homepage. Accessing it often required scrolling multiple screens, dismissing pop-ups for cookie permissions and newsletter signups, then finding a link that was a fraction of the size of other text on the page. So consumers still faced a serious hurdle when trying to get their information deleted. Take the simple opt-out form from IPAPI, a service offered by CloudEnd that finds the physical locations of internet visitors based on their IP addresses. People can go to the company's website to request that the company do not sell their personal data or invoke their right to delete it. But they would have had trouble finding the form since it contained code excluding it from search results. A spokesperson for CloudEnd described the code as an oversight and said the page had been changed to be visible to search engines. The markup at Cal Matters confirmed that the code had been removed as of July 31st. Telesign, a company that advertises fraud prevention services for businesses, offers a simple form for data deletion and opt-out or do not sell. But that form is hidden from search engines and other automated systems and isn't linked on its homepage. Instead, consumers must search about 7,000 words in a privacy policy filled with legalese to find a link to the page. A spokesperson for Telesign didn't respond to a request for comment. 5 of the pages listed in the California registry not only aren't indexed for search, they don't exist. For example, a company called BrightCheck, which offers AI-driven identity verification, lists a privacy instructions page on the California registry. But when the markup and Cal Matters visited the page in late July, we found a notice that the page no longer exists. The page was there on March 18th when the markup and Cal Matters first scanned the site, and the Wayback Machine has an archive of the page from February 14th. BrightCheck didn't respond to a request for comment. The California Consumer Privacy Act went into effect in 2020, governing companies that make most of their revenue from selling consumer data or make more than $25 million per year, or handle the data of more than 100,000 people in the state. With no comprehensive federal privacy law, the law is among the few regulations data brokers must comply with. California's most recent broker database lists nearly 500 companies, most of which consumers have likely never heard of. They include businesses with zippy startup names like StatSocial and UpLead, and they offer everything from email marketing tools to contact directories. Cal Matters last year published a guide with information on how consumers can exercise their rights using the database or third-party tools, and on how they can request deletion of their children's information. Tom Kemp, who I interviewed a while back, executive director of the entity tasked with enforcing the privacy law, the California Privacy Protection Agency, said in an interview that the agency had reproduced the markup and CalMatters findings. While he declined to comment on any particular company's practices, he pointed to an enforcement advisory from the agency on dark patterns, which are design choices that have, quote, the substantial effect of subverting or impairing a consumer's autonomy, decision-making, or choice, unquote. If a company makes it much more difficult to choose to remove their personal data than to contribute it, or includes excessive jargon or other hurdles for consumers to jump through to remove it, according to the advisory, they may be violating the law. Recognizing that most Californians have never heard of the hundreds of companies in the data broker registry, lawmakers in California recently passed the Delete Act. The law will create a system called the Delete Request and Opt-out Platform, or DROP, which will allow consumers in California to send a single, legally binding request to all data brokers on the registry at one time. The Privacy Protection Agency intends to launch it next year. So I'm pretty sure I talked about the Delete Act when it was passed, which is fantastic. And again, it just kind of shows, like we were talking with Monique Priestley last week, that these are iterative things. We don't always get it right out of the box. You know, you've got to try something, put it out there, see what happens, and then tweak it, because there's going to be loopholes. There's going to be, ways that these companies find around these laws, and then you've got to kind of patch up those holes. It's a process, but once one of these states goes through this process and learns all these things, all these other states can be learning from them. Okay, so this article kind of makes this vague reference to this code that you use to tell search engines, don't bother indexing this, don't put this in your search results. So the way this actually works in practice, and it's not a nefarious thing, it's actually a good thing, but it's being abused in this case. There's this thing that you could put on your website, if you're an owner of a website with lots of pages. You can put a special hidden file. Well, it's not hidden, you can actually find it. In fact, if you go to a lot of websites right now, go to their main website address and then put /robots.txt, you can see this file in a lot of cases. And this file basically tells search engines, look, don't bother indexing these pages. They're not really something that anybody's ever going to need to find. Maybe it just contains a lot of internal data or pages that just aren't worth you searching with your search engine. It's an optimization. It's telling search engines, look, don't bother with this stuff over here. Or it can even be, this is stuff that I want my readers to find when they come to my site, but I don't necessarily want them to find it by searching for it in your search engine and coming through that way. I want them to come to the site first, and then they'll naturally find this stuff once they get here. But in this case, what they're doing, and you can't do this accidentally. Somebody had to explicitly put in lines in this robot.txt file to say search engines do not index these privacy pages or files. That was no accident. It doesn't happen by accident. Now, who did it, and was it done at a lower level and not communicated up to higher management or something like that? Who knows? But it was definitely on purpose. The only question is who was actually the one responsible for making that choice and implementing it. But it does not surprise me that these companies are doing whatever they can to make it that much harder for people to exercise their human right to privacy. This next one is from TechCrunch, and it's, God. So we talked about the T app, TEA, which is used by women and exclusively for women to rate their experiences in dating other men, which has lots and lots of problems. But one of the problems that they recently had was that they didn't guard their data, and there was a massive leak, including things like identity documents that were uploaded by the users of this app. Well, not to be outdone, somebody came up with a TeaOnHer app, which is the reverse. It's an app for men to tattle on or tell tales about women they've dated so that other guys can, whatever. You get the idea. It's gross. But they also had some security problems. So let me read this article from TechCrunch. For an app all about spilling the beans on who you're allegedly dating, it's ironic that TeaOnHer was spilling the personal information of thousands of its users to the open web. TeaOnHer was designed for men to share photos and information about women they claim to have been dating. But much like Tea, the dating gossip app for women, it was trying to replicate, TeaOnHer had gaping holes in its security that exposed its users' personal information, including photos of their driver's licenses and other government-issued identity documents, as TechCrunch reported last week. These gated community-like apps were created ostensibly to let users share information about their relationships under the guise of personal safety. However, shoddy coding and security flaws highlight the ongoing privacy risks inherent in requiring users to submit sensitive information to use apps and websites. Such risks are only going to worsen. Popular apps and web services are already having to comply with age verification laws that require people to submit their identity documents before they can be granted access to adult-themed content, despite the privacy and security risks associated with storing databases of people's personal information. When TechCrunch published our story last week, we did not publish specific details of the bugs we discovered in TeaOnHer, erring on the side of caution so as not to help bad actors exploit the bug. Instead, we decided to publish a limited disclosure because of the app's rising popularity and the immediate risks that users faced when using the app. As of the time of disclosure, TeaOnHer was number 2 in the free app charts on the Apple App Store, a position still held by the app today. The flaws we found appear to be resolved. TechCrunch can now share how we were able to find users' driver's licenses within 10 minutes of being sent a link to the app in the App Store, thanks to easy-to-find flaws in the app's public-facing back-end system, or API, which is an application programming interface. The app's developer, Xavier Lampkin, did not respond to multiple requests for comment after we submitted details of the security flaws, nor would Lampkin commit to notifying affected TeaOnHer users or state regulators of the security lapse. We also asked Lampkin if any security reviews were carried out before the TeaOnHer app was launched, but we got no reply. Okay, so at this point, the article goes on to describe precisely how they were able to access all of TeaOnHer's users in less than 10 minutes. And I'm just going to quickly summarize that here. If this is something you're into, if you're into penetration testing on web apps or mobile apps, you will find this interesting and you should definitely check out the article. But the bottom line is basically this. This app has servers that run on the web, and the app on your phone talks to those servers. A lot of times when you have a server like this, you have what's called an application programming interface, or an API, that allows other software, other computerized devices with the right software running on them, to make queries to those servers and get back data. It's a very, very common thing, but normally, crucially, those APIs have authentication on them. The well-documented APIs that this TeaOnHer app had zero authentication. Anybody who knew about them, and TechCrunch was able to find and use these APIs within the span of 10 minutes of finding the app on the App Store. And I agree. This is something I totally could have done as well, in maybe not in 10 minutes, but in not a lot of time. This is something I am familiar with. And had I tried this, I would have been just as astounded as they were. So a couple other notes at the end of this story that I want to read. And let me just circle back and read a couple last bits. Note that the security contact listed by the app's developers bounced. When they finally found an email that worked, this was the reply from the app's developer. Quote, and by the way, this is sprinkled with some snarky responses. You'll understand where I'm putting those in. Quote, "You must have us confused with the T app," Lampkin replied. "We hadn't. We don't have a security breach or data leak." It did. "We have some bots at most, and we haven't scaled big enough to be in that conversation yet. Sorry you were misinformed." We weren't. And then the article says one last thing. "It doesn't matter if you're a one-person software shop or a billionaire vibe coding through a weekend," which is a offhand reference to BitChat from the guy who started Twitter. "Developers still have a responsibility to keep their users' data safe. If you can't keep your users' private data safe, don't build it to begin with." So, yeah. Guys, I don't know what else to tell you. Just don't blindly trust these apps. A lot of them have horrible, horrible security, and some just have really bad privacy. Like, they could be very secure, but if they're selling your data out the back door, it doesn't matter how secure they are. All right, now time for a little bit of good news. This is from Apple Insider, and it's about the UK basically backing down on the request to Apple for a backdoor, which is fantastic. So here we go. The UK has, for quite some time, demanded that Apple somehow breaks its end-to-end encryption and provides some form of backdoor. After a law update in 2024 and a secretive legal battle, the UK has apparently given up. In a post on X on Tuesday, U.S. spy chief Tulsi Gabbard claimed to have worked with partners in the UK as well as President Donald Trump and VP J.D. Vance on the UK's backdoor mandate. After months of work, Gabbard says that the UK has dropped the mandate affecting Apple. Gabbard adds that the UK's attempt to get access to Apple's customer data could have potentially given access to the data of American citizens and, quote, encroached on our civil liberties, unquote. At the time of publication, Gabbard is the only official source of the UK policy change. Neither the US nor UK governments have made any formal announcement about the matter, the BBC has observed. Given the secretive way the UK has tried to handle the matter, there may not even be any confirmation on that side of the Atlantic. In 2024, the UK revamped its UK Investigatory Powers Act of 2016 to give itself the authority to legally and secretly compel Apple to break the end-to-end encryption that its security and privacy depends on. Despite bipartisan protests from the US, the UK issued the order, and Apple could not continue to operate its end-to-end encryption without breaking the law. And by the way, they're referring to Apple's advanced data protection feature. Instead of allowing the UK backdoor access to encrypted data, however, Apple announced that it switched off end-to-end encryption in the UK. Now, again, that's just this ADP feature. It's pretty sure it doesn't apply to messages, for example, which are end-to-end encrypted, but I would think that would have been something the UK would have come for eventually as well, but that's not what was talked about here. This technically complies with the law, but means Apple did not create a backdoor that the UK and other bad actors could use. Ostensibly, the UK wanted Apple to create a backdoor into its encryption, not just turn off end-to-end encryption, so that government officials could read any data they deemed necessary in criminal investigations. What the UK asked for was worldwide access, which is part of what enraged the US. Arguably, what the UK really wanted was for Apple to do what it did and remove certain protections from the UK. If so, it got what it wanted, but there are ramifications. With UK data such as messaging less protected than anywhere else in the world, it's harder for anywhere else in the world to deal with the UK. In February 2025, U.S. intelligence services said they were considering a reduction or full stop on sharing data with the UK. It's not yet clear if Apple will turn end-to-end encryption back on, but it seems likely that it will not. So that makes a lot of great points, and that is something that I don't think a lot of these countries think about when they're trying to pass laws like this. UK basically told Apple secretly, and they weren't allowed to talk about it. It actually just leaked somehow, some way. And, who knows how that actually happened. But no one was supposed to know this was happening. The UK demanded Apple allow them access to all of their encrypted stuff. And Apple basically said, we can't do that without breaking it for everybody. So we're just going to remove that feature from the UK, which they did. And then around that time, somehow it leaked that this was happening. Again, no one was supposed to know this was even going on. And that allowed people to get involved, like, U.S. government to say, hey, you can't do that. And I guess they negotiated around it, and the UK finally gave up. But yeah, when you start doing things like this, that means that other countries aren't going to trust you. If this had gone the way the UK wanted, Apple would have given secret backdoor access to every Apple user's private data around the world to the UK government, and no one would have been the wiser. Anyway, so as of Saturday that I'm recording this, I have not seen any updates on this from Apple or anywhere else, like if they're going to turn advanced data protection back on for the UK. The author of this article doesn't seem to think they will. I honestly have no idea, but if I get an update on that, if anything changes in particular, I'll be sure to let you know. All right, one more article, and then we've got a really quick tip of the week. So this one is about chat control in the EU. And before I even try to describe it, let me just read this article from TechRadar, because basically what this article is talking about is this law is going to be going into effect very soon. And if you want to speak up against it, you need to do it soon. And now, specifically, you have a way that you can do that. So from the article from TechRadar, the controversial Child Sexual Abuse or CSAM scanning bill could be adopted as early as October 2025, but that doesn't mean your view can't be heard. If you're in the EU, the European Union, you can now take action against the controversial CSAM scanning bill, which is currently being discussed in the EU Council thanks to a new citizen-led initiative. Deemed by critics as chat control, the proposal was first unveiled in May of 2022 to halt the spread of CSAM content online by scanning all communications, especially those that are encrypted. A proposal that has attracted strong criticism and pushback among experts and lawmakers alike, chat control has never been closer to passing. The Danish version of the bill could be adopted as early as October 14th of 2025. Now, there's a group called Fight Chat Control. This is the new initiative they're talking about that just got launched, and this is a quote from them. Quote, "Our goal is to empower citizens with the knowledge they need to understand the implications of this legislation and to encourage them to take action by contacting their elected representatives in the European Parliament and national governments," unquote. The website includes easy-to-understand information about the CSAM scanning proposal while tracking the positions of EU member states and EU representatives. By heading to the Take Action tab, you can contact your country's MEPs, or members of the European Parliament, within a couple of clicks to ask them to scrap the controversial proposal. The website drafts the message for you based on your concerns about the proposed law. Another quote I assume from this group, quote, "We believe that privacy is a fundamental right and that end-to-end encryption is essential for protecting our personal communications, financial information, and digital identities. The chat control proposal would undermine these protections, potentially exposing citizens to new security risks and surveillance without meaningful benefits," unquote. From its first unveiling in 2022, the chat control proposal has seen many twists and turns as privacy advocates, technologists, and even politicians raise concerns, worries for which the Council has failed to find an agreement. The most contentious point is around encryption, the technology that the likes of WhatsApp, Signal, encrypted mail providers like ProtonMail, and even the best VPN apps use to ensure the content of your communications remains private from you and who you are talking to. Over the years, the EU Council has tried to find a compromise without any success. As per its first version, all messaging software providers would be required to perform indiscriminate scanning of private messages to look for CSAM. The backlash was strong, with the European Court of Human Rights proceeding to ban all legal efforts to weaken the encryption of secure communications in Europe. In June 2024, Belgium proposed a new, more compromising text to target only shared photos, videos, and URLs with users' permission. In February 2025, Poland tried to find a better compromise by making encrypted chat scanning voluntary and classified as quote-unquote prevention. Fast forward to July 2025, Denmark reintroduced chat control as a top legislative priority on its first day of presidency and put forward a new compromise text, which former MEP for the German Pirate Party and digital rights jurist Patrick Breyer deemed the more radical version so far. Crucially, momentum is growing among EU member states backing up the legislation. At the time of writing, according to Fight Chat Control's latest data, 15 member states support the law, including France, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and Ireland. 9 are undecided, such as Estonia, Germany, and Belgium, and only 3 oppose the bill in its current form: Austria, Netherlands, and Poland. On September 12, 2025, the Council is expected to share its final positions, with the vote set to take place on October 14th. So, I don't need to tell you that I think that this is a very bad thing. This has been going back and forth quite a bit. I haven't covered every single maneuver as that has happened, but it's crunch time now. This is it. This is where the rubber meets the road. If you don't like this and you want to fight back, you need to do it now. So if you are in the EU, you should absolutely make your opinions known, particularly if you are in any of those member states that are either undecided or are currently supporting this law. And again, that was France, Italy, Spain, Sweden, Ireland, Estonia, Germany, and Belgium. So there are links in this article, but I'll tell you this one right now, and hopefully you can remember it. It's pretty easy. Just go to fightchatcontrol.eu. And there you'll find information, and you'll find that wonderful tool that lets you contact your MEPs. And I've also put that link in the show notes. All right, so we are running a little long today. I apologize for that, but I knew we were going to have a big news show this week. There's a lot to catch up on. I missed a couple things during my trip out to Vegas for Hacker Summer Camp, and there was just a lot to cover. But this tip of the week will be pretty short because it's really just the first step in a series of articles that I'm going to be doing. So it's kind of an introduction. And this is something I've been wanting to do for a while now, and it's about data minimization, but it's really more about reducing your attack surface from a security perspective and reducing your digital footprint from a privacy perspective. And as I say in the article, The World Wide Web as we know it today really started around 1993. Now, the internet goes further back, but the web, when you start thinking of certainly like AOL and Prodigy and CompuServe and some of those early days when you were first kind of getting into email and surfing a very, very young World Wide Web, that's about when all that started, which is, if you do the math, that's like over 30 years ago. And so theoretically, any of us of a certain age who have been around that long could have online accounts that are that old. Did you have an AOL or a CompuServe or Prodigy account? Are you really sure that you don't still have one of those accounts laying around out there? And if you do, how good of a password do you think are on those accounts? Probably not a good one. And it's quite possibly one that's you've reused multiple places. But even if you don't go that far back, all of us today at this point surely have dozens at least of online accounts. And many of us, like me, have literally hundreds. So it's real easy to forget about some of these accounts. In a lot of cases, you created them on a whim for a one-time purchase maybe, or somebody forced you to sign up for an account to access some article you wanted to read, then you forgot about it. But every one of those accounts has at least some information on you. If nothing else, it has your email address. But some of these accounts might have other things. You might have posted a profile picture, even just an avatar picture. And you're thinking, well, what do I care about that? Well, okay, data brokers who can get a hold of this information, if you used that same, let's say, headshot or that same avatar picture, the exact same one, on multiple accounts, or if you use that same email on multiple accounts, which is probably more likely, those are all ways for these data brokers to correlate you and your data and your activities across multiple accounts. So again, even if the individual information on these old accounts might not be that much, it can still tell more about you than you might be thinking. So here's what we want to do. We want to go on a data diet. We want to trim the fat. We want to go back and exhaustively find as many of these old accounts that we've created as possible and make sure, first, that we have downloaded any historical data that we might want to save. 2, delete any data that we certainly don't need access to anymore and don't want this company to have access to anymore, because the only data that can't be stolen or abused or leaked is data that doesn't exist. And then finally, for a lot of the cases, you probably want to just close those accounts completely. Though I will argue that some accounts you probably shouldn't close. You should just kind of make them inactive or maybe kind of neuter them. Delete all of your important data, maybe change your name and your email address to something you don't care about, or maybe some kind of random information. I'll have all sorts of tips for you along those lines as we go through this. But that is what this project's going to be. So stay tuned for this. We're going to go through this over the next few tips of the week. There's going to be a series of blog articles on this. If you go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, if you're a newsletter subscriber, these will just come to you automatically as usual. And I've come up with some really clever methods for tracking down accounts that you have almost surely forgotten that you even had. And also, there's going to be some interesting tools that we're going to be using along the way that you might find other uses for as well. So that's your teaser tip of the week. We're going to have more to this in coming weeks. And your news of the week. All right, let me wrap this up quickly because I know we're running long today. My top patrons will be getting their bonus Merlin's Musings podcast on Thursday morning as usual. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about Micah Lee, who I've had on the show before, because he did a really interesting talk at DEF CON about Signalgate, which was when U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and several other people from the U.S. administration were using a knockoff of Signal called TMSGNL to send classified information amongst themselves, which they should not have been doing. But at some point, the source code for their app was found, and Micah found it and started pouring through it. And because it was a Git repository, and if you're not technical, you probably don't know or care what that means, but it comes with a lot of metadata. So there were ways to kind of tease through that code and figure out how it differed from regular Signal and find some really interesting and honestly damning things about the way they wrote this app. And he has a great talk about this. I put a link in the show notes if you want to watch it, where he walks through his investigation of this company that made this app and how horrible their security was. And so for Merlin's Music this week, I'm going to talk a little bit about that investigation. I've talked to Micah about it, and I know a little bit of inside stuff, and I'll walk you through a little bit of what he did there. So again, Thursday morning as usual for Merlin's Musings. I've had a wonderful chat with Carissa Veliz on the ethics of AI, artificial intelligence, and technology in general. That interview will be amazing when it comes out. I also just recorded a fun interview with the CEO and founder of Ente, E-N-T-E, and we'll talk about what it's like to make a privacy-first app in today's world of surveillance capitalism. But next week, you'll be hearing my panel interview with the team behind Ray Hunter, the open source project to help locate cell site simulators, which honestly, any one of you could do for about $20 and just a little bit of technical skill. And there's so many other interviews that are in the works or scheduled, so a lot of great stuff coming down the pike. One last quick reminder before I go, because I never talk about this stuff. I've got a lot of other stuff that you should look at if you haven't already. I've got the book, that's the main thing, but I've also got the blog and the newsletter, which I do mention from time to time. I sell merch. If you're interested, if you want to proudly display a Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons logo, that could be fun. You can find information about all of these things on my website. So if you have not been, or maybe if you haven't been in a while, check out firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. All right, that'll do it. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.